She leaned against my marble kitchen counter with the casual elegance of someone who believed she'd already claimed everything that mattered to me. Her perfectly manicured fingers traced the rim of my grandmother's crystal wine glass as she complimented the truffle pasta I'd spent 2 hours preparing, while my husband Marcus whispered something in her ear that made her laugh with genuine delight. Isabella Chen smiled at me with the kind of practiced warmth that could convince anyone she genuinely cared about my well-being, her emerald silk blouse catching the soft glow of the chandelier as she gestured gracefully during our dinner conversation. What she didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, my father would walk through that mahogany front door, and the confident expression she wore like designer armor would shatter into absolute terror. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Victoria Sterling Hamilton, and I'm about to tell you how one seemingly perfect dinner party became the moment when 2 years of carefully orchestrated lies exploded in the most spectacular way imaginable. But this isn't just about discovering my husband's affair with his business partner. This is about uncovering a conspiracy so intricate, so calculated, that it involved not just my marriage, but my family's vast fortune and a woman whose past was far more sinister than her polished exterior suggested. I'm 32 years old, a successful art curator who owns Sterling Contemporary Gallery in the prestigious Beacon Hill district of Rosehaven City, about 3 hours north of Boston. Until 4 months ago, I thought I understood exactly who I was, who my family was, and what my privileged life represented. I was the woman who could transform unknown artists into cultural sensations, the wife who supported her husband's ambitious tech startup ventures, and the daughter who'd been carefully groomed to eventually inherit and manage the Sterling family's $2 billion real estate empire. My husband, Marcus Hamilton, had been the golden boy of Rosehaven's tech scene since we'd moved here 5 years ago. At 35, he was everything this innovative, wealth-driven community wanted in an entrepreneur: tall, brilliant, with piercing blue eyes and the kind of magnetic charisma that made investors open their checkbooks before he'd finished explaining his vision. He'd built Hamilton Digital Solutions from a one-room office into a cutting-edge consulting firm that specialized in helping traditional businesses navigate digital transformation. More importantly, he'd positioned himself as the inevitable next big tech success story, with venture capitalists from Silicon Valley regularly flying cross-country to court his partnership. Our penthouse on Evergreen Boulevard was the kind of place that appeared in Architectural Digest, a stunning contemporary space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Rosehaven Harbor, filled with carefully curated artwork that I'd personally selected to showcase emerging and established talents. It was the perfect backdrop for the high-stakes networking that had become central to our lives, the ideal setting for a power couple who seemed to have effortlessly combined old money sophistication with new economy innovation. But as I sat there, watching Isabella Chen charm our dinner guests with her expertise in blockchain applications and artificial intelligence integration, I knew that everything beautiful about our life was built on foundations that were about to crumble. The woman laughing so naturally with our neighbors, the woman who'd been Marcus's business partner and closest confidant for the past 18 months, was sleeping with my husband. What made it infinitely worse was that she had no idea I'd discovered their affair 6 weeks ago. What made it absolutely devastating was what I'd learned about her true intentions just yesterday. Isabella Chen wasn't just Marcus's mistress and business partner, she was a sophisticated corporate spy whose specialty was infiltrating wealthy families to steal trade secrets, financial information, and inheritance strategies for competing conglomerates. The irony was so perfect it felt orchestrated by some malevolent force with a taste for elaborate revenge. Isabella had spent months positioning herself as the ideal business partner to help Marcus build his tech empire, all while conducting an affair that could destroy everything he'd worked for. She'd attended our charity galas, complimented my art selections, even offered thoughtful advice about balancing creative passion with business acumen. She'd looked me in the eye dozens of times while lying about who she was and what she wanted. But tonight, in exactly 47 minutes, when my father walked through that door expecting to find a pleasant family dinner, Isabella Chen would come face to face with the one man whose resources and connections could expose not just her current operation, but an entire network of corporate espionage that had been systematically targeting America's wealthiest families. My father, Theodore Sterling, wasn't just a millionaire, he was one of the most powerful real estate moguls on the East Coast, with political connections that reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. More importantly, he was the man who'd spent the last 30 years building an intelligence network that rivaled some government agencies, all designed to protect his business empire from exactly the kind of sophisticated infiltration that Isabella specialized in. I'd spent 6 weeks planning this moment with the same meticulous attention to detail I brought to organizing world-class art exhibitions. Every element had been carefully considered, from the guest list to the timing, from the menu selection to the exact moment when my father would make his entrance. Isabella believed she was attending a routine dinner party where she could continue playing her role as Marcus's trusted partner while secretly planning to steal the Sterling family's most guarded financial secrets. Instead, she was about to discover that some targets are far more dangerous than they appear, that some families have resources that can't be easily manipulated, and that some women are far more strategic when they appear to be perfectly naive and trusting. The woman who thought she'd seduced her way into one of America's greatest fortunes was about to learn that she'd walked into a trap 6 weeks in the making. The dinner party was about to become a reckoning that would expose not just an affair, but a criminal conspiracy that reached back years and involved corporate espionage on a scale that could bring down entire companies, and it would all begin the moment my father walked through that door and Isabella Chen realized that her past had finally caught up with her present. The stage was set, the players were in position, and in 46 minutes and counting, everything would change forever. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. Growing up as the only daughter of Theodore Sterling meant learning early that wealth wasn't just about money, it was about power, influence, and the constant vigilance required to protect both. My childhood in the Sterling mansion on Millionaire's Row in Greenwich had been a masterclass in understanding that every friendship, every romantic relationship, and every business partnership carried the potential for betrayal by those who saw our family fortune as their ultimate prize. My mother, Catherine Sterling, had been a prominent socialite and philanthropist before her death in a car accident when I was 16. She'd taught me that grace under pressure wasn't just a social skill, it was a survival mechanism for women in our position. Victoria, she'd often said while we reviewed guest lists for charity events, never forget that half the people who smile at you are calculating how much you're worth, and the other half are planning how to take it from you. Those lessons had shaped my approach to building Sterling Contemporary Gallery from the ground up. I'd started with a small space in Rosehaven's Arts District 7 years ago, using a modest trust fund and an absolute determination to prove that I could succeed based on talent rather than family connections. My eye for identifying breakthrough artists had earned me respect in the international art world, and my reputation for discretion and integrity had made me the go-to curator for collectors who valued both aesthetic excellence and complete confidentiality. The gallery's success had been crucial when Marcus and I decided to make Rosehaven our permanent home 5 years ago. Marcus had been recruited by the city's Economic Development Council, who'd seen potential in a young entrepreneur with innovative ideas about digital transformation and artificial intelligence integration. The city was experiencing unprecedented growth as tech companies sought alternatives to Silicon Valley's astronomical costs, and Marcus's expertise in helping traditional businesses modernize had quickly made him indispensable to the local business community. Our marriage had been built on what I'd believed was mutual respect and shared ambitions. We'd met during my final year at Harvard Business School when Marcus was completing his computer science PhD at MIT. He'd been brilliant without being condescending, ambitious without being ruthless, and he'd possessed the rare ability to make everyone around him feel intellectually stimulated and personally valued. When he proposed after 3 years of dating, I believed I was marrying not just a man I loved, but a true partner who understood the complexities of my family legacy while pursuing his own vision for technological innovation. For the first 4 years of our marriage, that belief had seemed justified. Marcus had encouraged my gallery's expansion, celebrated my professional achievements, and never once suggested that my family's wealth threatened his masculine pride or entrepreneurial independence. When I'd landed the contract to curate the permanent collection for Rosehaven's new Museum of Contemporary Arts, he'd been prouder than I was. When my exhibition of emerging digital artists had been featured in Artforum, he'd framed the article and displayed it prominently in his office. He'd seemed to understand that my success enhanced rather than diminished our partnership, but the introduction of Isabella Chen into our lives 18 months ago had changed everything in ways that I'd been slow to recognize. Marcus had met her at a venture capital conference in San Francisco, where she'd been presenting on blockchain applications for supply chain management. Her credentials were impressive: an MBA from Stanford, 5 years of experience with a prestigious tech consulting firm in Seattle, and a portfolio of successful digital transformation projects that included several Fortune 500 companies. From the moment she'd walked into our first business meeting at the Rosehaven Country Club, Isabella had commanded attention in a way that seemed effortless but was clearly the result of years of careful cultivation. She was 29 years old with the kind of sophisticated beauty that suggested both natural gifts and significant investment in maintaining them. Her black hair was always perfectly styled, whether she was presenting complex technical concepts, In our dining room or attending casual networking events at local restaurants, she dressed with the calculated precision of someone who understood that every outfit was a form of communication, favoring jewel tones that complemented her Asian features and tailored pieces that conveyed both technical competence and feminine appeal. But it was her intellectual presence that had initially impressed both Marcus and me. Isabella didn't just understand emerging technologies, she grasped the deeper market dynamics that drove successful digital adoption in traditional industries. She could explain why a particular demographic would embrace artificial intelligence applications while simultaneously outlining the regulatory challenges that could slow implementation. Her analysis of venture capital trends was sophisticated without being academic, and her strategic recommendations consistently demonstrated both technical expertise and business acumen that impressed even the most skeptical investors. During those early months, I'd found myself genuinely enjoying our interactions. Isabella had a gift for making everyone feel like the most fascinating person in the room, and her questions about my art curation work had seemed motivated by genuine intellectual curiosity rather than mere politeness. She'd asked detailed questions about how I evaluated emerging artists, what factors influenced my acquisition decisions, and how I balanced aesthetic vision with market considerations. When I'd mentioned struggling with a particularly challenging installation that required integrating digital components with traditional media, Isabella had offered insights about user experience design that had actually helped me reframe my approach to the project. She'd also shown what appeared to be sincere interest in my family's business empire and the challenges of balancing creative passion with inherited responsibility. During one particularly long strategy session that had extended into dinner, she'd listened thoughtfully as I explained the complexities of being groomed for eventual leadership of a multi-billion-dollar corporation while pursuing independent professional achievement. Her responses had been measured and empathetic, acknowledging the unique psychological pressures that came with inherited wealth while respecting my desire to establish individual credibility. It takes real strength to build something entirely your own when you could easily rely on family resources, she'd said that evening, her voice carrying what seemed like genuine admiration. Marcus is lucky to have a wife who understands that. True partnership means supporting each other's independent achievements rather than just combining existing advantages. At the time, I'd been touched by her understanding and impressed by her ability to grasp the nuanced emotional terrain that defined my relationship with both my family legacy and my marriage. Isabella's integration into our social circle had been gradual but thorough. She'd attended dinner parties at our penthouse, joined us for weekend wine tastings at Rosehaven's boutique vineyards, and even volunteered to help with the annual fundraiser for the Children's Arts Education Foundation that I'd organized for the past 4 years. Her presence at these events had never felt intrusive or calculating. Instead, she'd seemed to enhance every gathering with her wit, her thoughtful questions, and her ability to connect with people across different industries and backgrounds. Marcus's colleagues and their wives had embraced her almost immediately. Patricia Whitmore, whose husband served on the City Planning Commission, had praised Isabella's insights about sustainable urban development during a dinner party at the yacht club. She really understands how to balance innovation with community values, Patricia had told me over coffee the following week. Marcus is smart to have someone like that as a business partner. Even my more skeptical friends, like Sarah Chen, who owned Rosehaven's most successful marketing agency, had admitted that Isabella brought a level of technical sophistication to Marcus's business that elevated his entire operation. The professional relationship between Marcus and Isabella had appeared to exemplify everything positive about modern business partnerships. She challenged his assumptions without undermining his confidence, pushed him to articulate his vision more clearly without changing his fundamental approach, and helped him navigate the inevitable conflicts that arose during any ambitious expansion. Their working sessions in our home office had seemed productive and energizing, with both of them emerging from long planning meetings with the kind of focused enthusiasm that suggested genuine intellectual collaboration and mutual respect. What I hadn't realized until 6 weeks ago was that Isabella's expertise in understanding people's motivations and vulnerabilities extended far beyond business strategy, and that every conversation, every shared confidence, and every moment of apparent friendship had been part of a larger operation designed to systematically access and exploit my family's most guarded secrets. The first crack in Isabella's perfect facade appeared during what should have been a routine evening at home 6 weeks ago. Marcus had been working late again, the third consecutive night of supposed emergency client meetings that required his immediate attention. These sudden crisis situations had become increasingly common over the past 4 months, always involving clients whose problems couldn't wait until morning and whose confidentiality requirements prevented Marcus from discussing details even with his wife. I'd grown accustomed to these disruptions in our previously predictable routine, attributing them to the natural growing pains of an expanding business. Hamilton Digital Solutions had been gaining momentum rapidly, with new contracts from major corporations requiring more sophisticated project management and extended consultation periods. Marcus's dedication to client service had always been one of his most admirable qualities, and his willingness to work whatever hours were necessary to deliver exceptional results had contributed significantly to his reputation for reliability and excellence. That particular Tuesday evening, I'd been working late myself, preparing for a major exhibition opening featuring a revolutionary new digital artist whose interactive installations were generating significant buzz in the international art community. The complexity of integrating traditional gallery lighting with advanced projection systems required meticulous coordination, and I'd been absorbed in technical specifications when I realized I'd left my presentation materials in Marcus's home office. The penthouse was designed with separate workspaces to ensure that our professional activities didn't interfere with each other, but we'd always maintained an open-door policy regarding access to each other's offices. Trust and transparency had been fundamental principles of our marriage, and neither of us had ever felt the need to establish privacy boundaries around our work environments. As I entered Marcus's office to retrieve my exhibition notes, I noticed his laptop was still open on his desk, displaying what appeared to be a video conference that had been paused rather than properly ended. The screen showed a frozen image of Isabella, but something about the visual composition seemed wrong for a business meeting. The lighting was soft and intimate rather than the harsh fluorescent illumination typical of office environments, and Isabella appeared to be wearing what looked like a silk robe rather than professional attire. My initial reaction was confusion rather than suspicion. Perhaps the meeting had been scheduled during an unusual hour due to time zone differences with international clients, or maybe there had been some technical malfunction that had caused the video feed to freeze at an awkward moment. I moved toward the computer to properly end the call and shut down the system, assuming Marcus had simply forgotten to close the application before leaving for his evening appointment, but as I approached the desk, the audio from the paused call suddenly resumed, and Isabella's voice filled the office with an intimacy that immediately shattered every rational explanation I'd been constructing. "I can't stop thinking about this afternoon." Her voice was soft and breathless, completely different from the professional tone I'd heard her use during countless business discussions. "The way you looked at me when we were reviewing the quarterly projections made it impossible to concentrate on anything else." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I found myself frozen in place, unable to process what I was hearing while simultaneously desperate to understand the full scope of what was being revealed. Marcus's voice responded with equal intimacy, his tone carrying an emotional vulnerability that I recognized as the same voice he'd once used during our most private moments together. "Being in the same room with you while maintaining professional distance is torture," he said, and I could hear the genuine longing in his voice. "Every client meeting where I have to watch you present technical solutions while knowing I can't publicly acknowledge how much I want you is getting harder to endure. 6 more weeks until the Morrison contract is finalized, and then we can finally stop hiding this." The conversation continued for several more minutes, revealing not just the physical nature of their relationship but the depth of emotional connection that had developed between them. They discussed specific hotels where they'd been meeting, restaurants where they'd shared intimate dinners disguised as business meals, and vacation destinations they were planning to visit together once certain professional obligations were completed. More devastating than the evidence of physical infidelity was the casual way they discussed my role in their relationship. Isabella mentioned that I'd been asking questions about her background that suggested growing suspicion, while Marcus expressed frustration about maintaining the facade of marital contentment when his emotional investment had shifted so completely toward his business partner. "Sometimes I feel like Victoria sees our marriage as a carefully managed art installation rather than a genuine relationship," Marcus said, his voice carrying a bitterness that I'd never suspected existed. "She's so focused on maintaining the perfect aesthetic of our life together that she's lost sight of what originally attracted me to her. With you, I feel like the man I'm supposed to be instead of the husband I'm expected to perform." Isabella's response was equally crushing in its calculated assessment of my perceived weaknesses. "You deserve someone who appreciates your vision instead of trying to fit it into predetermined frameworks," she said with apparent sincerity. "Victoria's approach to everything is so controlling and methodical. It probably worked when you were building your initial client base, but real innovation requires a different kind of partner. Someone who can enhance your capabilities instead of limiting them to socially acceptable parameters." As I listened to this systematic destruction of my character and our marriage, I began to understand that their affair wasn't a spontaneous attraction that had evolved unexpectedly. The language they used, the detailed knowledge Isabella demonstrated about my personality and behavior patterns, and the strategic way they discussed timing and logistics suggested a relationship that had been carefully planned and executed over An extended period. Most disturbing was the clinical precision with which Isabella analyzed my responses to various situations, as if she'd been conducting psychological research rather than developing a friendship. She referenced specific conversations we'd had about family dynamics, noted my reactions to changes in Marcus's schedule, and even mentioned my facial expressions during dinner parties where she'd been particularly charming with other guests. "She's definitely becoming more observant about our interactions," Isabella said during one particularly chilling exchange. "Last week when you handed me that glass of wine, she noticed that your fingers lingered on mine for just a moment too long." I saw her watching us from across the room, and her expression was more analytical than jealous. "Victoria doesn't get emotional about perceived threats, she gets strategic." Marcus's response revealed how thoroughly they'd underestimated my capabilities while simultaneously acknowledging them. "That's what makes this situation delicate," he admitted. "Victoria isn't the type to confront problems directly until she's gathered comprehensive evidence and developed a complete plan. If she's starting to suspect something, we need to be much more careful about maintaining professional boundaries in public settings." The conversation that had begun as an intimate exchange between lovers had evolved into something more calculating and manipulative. They discussed strategies for managing my suspicions, ways to redirect my attention toward my gallery work, and methods for gradually reducing my involvement in Marcus's business activities without creating obvious cause for concern. Isabella suggested that Marcus begin expressing subtle dissatisfaction with aspects of our domestic life, creating emotional distance that would provide justification for spending more time away from home. She recommended that he start questioning my social choices, criticizing my professional priorities, and generally undermining my confidence in our relationship without making accusations that could prompt me to investigate further. "The key is to make her feel like she's failing as a wife without giving her specific problems to solve," Isabella explained with the expertise of someone who'd clearly orchestrated similar psychological campaigns before. "Victoria's entire identity is built around competence and control. If you can gradually convince her that she's inadequate in ways she can't clearly identify or address, she'll become so focused on fixing herself that she won't have energy to examine what you're actually doing." The sophistication of their psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. They weren't just conducting an affair, they were implementing a comprehensive strategy designed to gaslight me into accepting responsibility for the deterioration of our marriage while remaining completely unaware of the actual cause. Isabella had studied my personality with the precision of a clinical psychologist, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited to control my emotional responses and behavioral choices. As I stood in Marcus's office listening to the detailed planning of my emotional destruction, I realized that everything I'd believed about our marriage, our life together, and Isabella's role in our social circle had been carefully constructed illusions designed to facilitate their relationship while ensuring my continued cooperation and financial support. The woman I'd trusted with intimate details about my family, my business challenges, and my deepest insecurities had been systematically weaponizing that information against me. The husband I'd supported through every professional challenge and personal growth experience had been collaborating in a conspiracy designed to convince me that I was the problem in our relationship, but what neither of them could have anticipated was that discovering their betrayal wouldn't devastate me, it would activate every strategic instinct my father had spent 30 years teaching me about protecting the Sterling family from exactly this kind of sophisticated manipulation. The discovery of Marcus and Isabella's affair should have been devastating enough to consume all my emotional energy, but something about the clinical precision of their manipulation tactics nagged at my subconscious in ways that demanded deeper investigation. Over the following days, as I maintained the facade of normalcy while processing the betrayal, I began noticing inconsistencies in Isabella's background that had previously seemed like minor social awkwardness but now took on more sinister implications. During a charity luncheon at the Rosehaven Yacht Club 3 days after my discovery, I found myself studying Isabella's interactions with other guests with the analytical skills my father had taught me for evaluating potential business partners. Theodore Sterling hadn't built a $2 billion empire by taking people at face value. He'd succeeded by developing an almost supernatural ability to detect deception, manipulation, and hidden agendas in professional relationships. Always watch how people tell stories about their past, he taught me during countless dinner conversations throughout my childhood. Honest people include irrelevant details and admit uncertainty about specific facts. Liars provide too much precision about things that should be fuzzy and avoid topics that should be memorable. As Isabella charmed the wives of Rosehaven's most prominent businessmen with anecdotes about her Stanford MBA experience, I began applying those analytical techniques to her seemingly casual reminiscences. When Patricia Whitmore mentioned having Attended a fundraising gala at Stanford during the same time period Isabella claimed to have been completing her degree. Isabella's response was oddly vague about details that should have been vivid memories for any graduate student. She couldn't recall specific professors who should have been legendary figures in her program. Showed no recognition when Patricia mentioned campus traditions that were supposedly central to MBA student life, and quickly redirected conversations away from her academic experience toward more recent professional achievements. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Isabella demonstrated encyclopedic knowledge about business trends and technical innovations while maintaining mysterious gaps in her personal history. More troubling was her reaction when conversation turned to family backgrounds and childhood experiences. While other guests shared detailed stories about their upbringings, Isabella offered only generic comments about growing up in various places due to her father's international business interests. When pressed for specifics about where she'd attended high school or what her parents did professionally, she became visibly uncomfortable and deflected attention toward other people's stories. The evasiveness might have been explainable as natural privacy or social anxiety, but combined with her sophisticated manipulation of Marcus and her apparent expertise in psychological warfare, it suggested someone with professional training in maintaining false identities. I began to suspect that Isabella Chen might not even be her real name, and that her entire background story was carefully constructed fiction designed to facilitate infiltration of wealthy social circles. That suspicion intensified when I decided to conduct discreet research into her claimed professional history. Using the advanced database access that came with my gallery's membership in international art authentication networks, I began systematically verifying the credentials Isabella had presented when Marcus first introduced her as a potential business partner 18 months ago. The Stanford Graduate School of Business directory yielded no record of any Isabella Chen graduating with an MBA during the time frame she'd specified. Expanding the search to include alternative spellings, middle names, and degree programs from adjacent years produced the same result: no trace of her existence in their alumni records. When I contacted the registrar's office through a friend who worked in university administration, claiming to be verifying credentials for a potential art acquisition partnership, the response was definitive: no one matching Isabella's description or claimed academic history had attended Stanford during the relevant period. Cross-referencing her supposed employment history with the Seattle-based consulting firm she'd listed as her previous employer revealed even more disturbing inconsistencies. While the company existed and had an impressive client roster, their human resources department had no record of anyone named Isabella Chen ever working for their organization. More significantly, several of the major projects she'd claimed to have led during her time with that firm had actually been completed by entirely different teams, none of which included anyone matching her description or background. The systematic fabrication of her professional credentials suggested someone with extensive experience in creating false identities for specific purposes. This wasn't casual resume inflation or the kind of minor embellishment common in competitive job markets. It was comprehensive identity construction that required sophisticated resources and professional expertise. As I delved deeper into available public records, using techniques I'd learned during art authentication investigations to trace provenance and ownership histories, I discovered that Isabella's current identity appeared to have been established approximately 3 years ago. Prior to that date, there was virtually no digital footprint for anyone named Isabella Chen with her claimed background, education, or professional experience. The timing was significant because 3 years ago corresponded exactly with the period when my father had begun receiving warnings from his private security consultants about increased corporate espionage targeting wealthy families in the Northeast. Theodore Sterling's business empire included extensive real estate holdings, venture capital investments, and proprietary development projects that made him a prime target for competitors seeking insider information about acquisition strategies, investment decisions, and market timing. His security team had identified several incidents where sophisticated operatives had infiltrated social circles around prominent families, establishing long-term relationships that provided access to confidential financial information, business strategies, and family dynamics that could be exploited for competitive advantage. The operations were so sophisticated that victims often remained unaware they'd been targeted until significant damage had already been done. When I cross-referenced the timeline of Isabella's identity creation with my father's security reports, a chilling pattern emerged. The warnings about corporate espionage had specifically mentioned operatives who specialized in romantic relationships with family members of high-value targets, using emotional manipulation and sexual intimacy to gain access to confidential information that would be impossible to obtain through traditional business intelligence methods. The reports described women who were trained in psychology, business analysis, and social engineering, capable of maintaining false identities for years while systematically extracting valuable information from their targets. These operatives typically focused on younger family members who might have access to sensitive information but lacked the experience or training to recognize sophisticated manipulation techniques. Marcus, as the husband of Theodore Sterling's only daughter and heir, would represent an ideal target for such an operation. His position provided potential access to our family's financial strategies, investment decisions, and business relationships, while his relative inexperience with corporate espionage made him vulnerable to emotional manipulation by a skilled operative. The realization that Isabella's infiltration of our lives might be part of a larger corporate espionage operation targeting my family's business empire transformed my understanding of everything that had happened over the past 18 months. Her affair with Marcus wasn't a romantic betrayal that had evolved naturally, it was a professional assignment designed to gain access to Sterling family secrets that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the right competitors. Every conversation she'd had with me about my family's business interests, every question about my father's investment strategies, and every casual inquiry about our personal relationships suddenly took on sinister significance. Isabella hadn't been developing a friendship, she'd been conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence that could be used to anticipate our family's business moves, identify our vulnerabilities, and potentially manipulate market conditions. To our disadvantage, the sophistication of the operation was breathtaking in its scope and implications. Isabella had spent 18 months not just seducing my husband but systematically mapping our family's entire financial ecosystem, identifying key relationships, understanding decision-making processes, and gaining access to information that could cause catastrophic damage to the Sterling Empire if it fell into the wrong hands. But what Isabella and her unknown employers couldn't have anticipated was that Theodore Sterling hadn't built his fortune by accident. The same intelligence networks that had identified the corporate espionage threat were also capable of investigating suspected operatives and tracing their connections back to the organizations that had deployed them. More importantly, they'd underestimated the bonds of loyalty that held the Sterling family together. My father had spent 30 years teaching me that wealth was only as secure as the family's ability to protect itself from exactly this kind of sophisticated attack. Every lesson about strategic thinking, every discussion about trust and verification, and every warning about the dangers of our position had been preparation for exactly this moment. Isabella Chen had made the mistake of targeting a family that had been preparing for war long before she'd arrived in Rosehaven. Her assignment was about to become the most expensive failure of her professional career, and the intelligence network she served was about to discover that some families fight back with resources that exceed anything they'd ever encountered. Understanding the full scope of Isabella's operation required examining the broader context of threats that had been targeting the Sterling family empire for years before her arrival in our lives. My father's warnings about corporate espionage weren't theoretical concerns, they were based on documented attempts by rival organizations to infiltrate and destabilize successful family businesses throughout the Northeast Corridor. The Sterling fortune had been built through 3 generations of strategic real estate acquisitions, beginning with my great-grandfather Samuel Sterling's prescient purchases of Manhattan commercial properties during the Great Depression. When other investors were selling at catastrophic losses, Samuel had leveraged every available resource to acquire prime real estate that would become the foundation of an empire worth billions by the time my father inherited control of the family holdings. Theodore Sterling had expanded beyond traditional real estate into venture capital, private equity, and strategic business consulting, creating a diversified portfolio that included significant stakes in emerging technology companies, sustainable energy projects, and international development initiatives. His success had been built on an almost supernatural ability to identify market trends years before they became obvious to competitors, a skill that had made Sterling Enterprises one of the most influential private investment firms on the East Coast. But that success had also made our family a prime target for competitors who couldn't match our strategic insights through legitimate means. Corporate espionage targeting wealthy families had evolved from crude information gathering into sophisticated long-term operations that could span years and involve multiple operatives working in coordination to access different aspects of a target's business activities. The intelligence reports my father received from his security consultants detailed operations where competing organizations had invested millions of dollars in training operatives to infiltrate target families through romantic relationships, business partnerships, and social connections. These weren't simple attempts to steal specific documents or overhear confidential conversations, they were comprehensive campaigns designed to understand every aspect of how successful families made decisions, identified opportunities, and protected their interests. One particularly chilling case study involved the Pemberton family of Boston, whose textile manufacturing empire had been systematically destroyed over a 3-year period by operatives who had infiltrated their social circle and business operations. The Pembertons had lost over $800 million in value through a series of seemingly unrelated setbacks that were later revealed to be coordinated attacks based on intelligence gathered through personal relationships that family members had believed were genuine friendships and romantic connections. The operative who had targeted the Pemberton heir had spent 2 years establishing credibility as a business consultant before seducing him into a relationship that provided access to confidential family financial information. She had systematically gathered intelligence about planned acquisitions, investment strategies, and market timing decisions, then shared that information with competitors who were able to anticipate and counter every major business move the Pemberton family attempted. By the time the family realized they were under attack, the damage was irreversible. Their business empire had been dismantled piece by piece through a combination of market manipulation, strategic interference, and the exploitation of confidential information that should never have been accessible to outside parties. The operative had disappeared with a new identity and substantial financial compensation, leaving behind a devastated family whose trust in personal relationships had been permanently shattered. The Pemberton case had prompted my father to implement comprehensive security measures designed to protect our family from similar attacks. Every potential romantic partner, business associate, and social connection was subjected to discreet background verification through private investigators who specialized in detecting false identities and hidden agendas. Family members were trained to recognize manipulation techniques and taught to maintain operational security regarding sensitive business information. Most importantly, my father had established protocols for sharing intelligence about suspected operatives with other wealthy families and law enforcement agencies that specialized in corporate espionage. The Sterling Security Network included former federal agents, international business intelligence specialists, and technology experts who could trace digital footprints and financial connections that revealed the true origins of suspected infiltration attempts. When I contacted my father's head of security, James Morrison, to report my suspicions about Isabella, his response was immediate and alarming. "We've been tracking an operative matching that description for the past 6 months," he told me during a secure phone conversation. "She's connected to an organization called Pacific Strategic Solutions that specializes in long-term infiltration operations targeting high-net-worth families throughout North America." Pacific Strategic Solutions operated as a legitimate business consulting firm with offices in Seattle, Vancouver, and Hong Kong, but intelligence analysis had revealed that their primary revenue source came from corporate espionage contracts with Asian conglomerates seeking to gain competitive advantages over American family businesses. Their operatives were extensively trained in psychology, social engineering, and identity construction, capable of maintaining false personas for years while systematically extracting valuable intelligence from their targets. The woman you know as Isabella Chen is actually Dr. Li Wei, a former psychology professor who was recruited by Pacific Strategic 5 years ago after being terminated from her university position for conducting unauthorized research on manipulation and coercion techniques, Morrison explained. Her academic background in behavioral psychology makes her particularly effective at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities in her targets. The revelation that Isabella was actually a disgraced psychology professor explained the sophisticated manipulation techniques she'd used against both Marcus and me. Her ability to analyze our relationship dynamics, identify our individual vulnerabilities, and design psychological campaigns tailored to our specific personality types wasn't intuitive talent. It was professional expertise developed through years of academic research and practical application. Morrison's investigation had revealed that Dr. Li Wei had been responsible for at least 4 previous infiltration operations targeting wealthy families in California, Oregon, and British Columbia. In each case, she had established romantic relationships with family members who provided access to confidential business information, which was then used by Pacific Strategic's clients to manipulate market conditions and disrupt the target families' business operations. Her most successful operation had involved a 2-year relationship with the son of a prominent Vancouver real estate developer, during which she had gained access to detailed information about planned commercial developments throughout Western Canada. That intelligence had been sold to competing developers who were able to anticipate and outbid her target's family on every major acquisition opportunity, ultimately forcing them to sell their business empire at a significant loss. The concerning aspect of her current operation is the extended timeline, Morrison continued. 18 months represents a much longer investment than her previous assignments, which suggests that Pacific Strategic considers the Sterling family a particularly high-value target worth the additional resources and risk. The intelligence gathered about our family's business operations during Isabella's time in Rosehaven could potentially be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to competitors seeking to anticipate our investment strategies, interfere with our development projects, or manipulate market conditions to their advantage. Every conversation Marcus had shared with her about my father's business interests, every casual comment about family financial discussions, and every detail about our social connections had been systematically recorded and analyzed for strategic value, but the most disturbing revelation was that Isabella's operation was likely just one component of a larger campaign targeting multiple aspects of our family's business empire. Pacific Strategic typically deployed several operatives simultaneously, creating overlapping intelligence networks that provided comprehensive coverage of their targets' activities and relationships. We have reason to believe there are at least 2 other operatives currently active in your family's business environment, Morrison warned. One may be positioned within your father's investment firm, and another appears to be targeting your family's social circle through the art world. Connections you've developed through your gallery. The scope of the threat was staggering in its implications. For potentially years, our family had been under systematic surveillance by a network of professional operatives who had been gathering intelligence that could be used to destroy everything 3 generations of Sterlings had built. Every business decision, every investment strategy, and every family relationship had been compromised by people we'd trusted and welcomed into our most private spaces. The system was designed to be completely autonomous, uploading encrypted data to secure servers that could be accessed remotely without leaving any trace of monitoring activity on our home network. Every word Isabella spoke, every document she photographed with concealed cameras, and every conversation she had with Marcus would be preserved as evidence that could later be used in criminal proceedings. More importantly, the surveillance system was sophisticated enough to detect when Isabella was using her own recording devices or communication equipment to transmit intelligence back to her handlers. Within the first week of monitoring, we discovered that she was conducting encrypted video calls with unknown parties during times when she believed she was alone in our home office, apparently providing detailed briefings about information she'd gathered regarding our family's business activities. The second phase involved creating opportunities for Isabella to access fabricated information that would allow us to trace how intelligence was being transmitted from her to Pacific Strategic Solutions and ultimately to their clients. Morrison's team prepared a series of false documents describing fictional investment opportunities, acquisition targets, and strategic initiatives that appeared to represent genuine Sterling Enterprises business plans. These documents were strategically placed where Isabella would discover them during her regular intelligence gathering activities, each one containing unique identifiers that would allow us to track how the information was processed and distributed within the espionage network. By monitoring which fictional opportunities generated market activity or competitive responses, we could identify not only who was receiving the stolen intelligence but also how quickly it was being acted upon by Pacific Strategic's clients. The psychological complexity of maintaining normal relationships with Marcus and Isabella while secretly conducting a counterintelligence operation against them required emotional discipline that tested every aspect of my training in strategic thinking and operational security. During dinner conversations, I had to respond naturally to Isabella's probing questions about my father's business activities while ensuring that any information I provided was either already public knowledge or carefully crafted misinformation designed to mislead her handlers. Similarly, my interactions with Marcus required walking a delicate line between maintaining marital intimacy and avoiding any discussion that might reveal my knowledge of his affair or my suspicions about Isabella's true identity. The challenge was particularly acute because Marcus had become increasingly careless about operational security, apparently believing that his emotional connection with Isabella had rendered him invulnerable to detection or consequences. During one particularly revealing conversation that was captured by our surveillance system, Marcus provided Isabella with detailed information about a confidential family meeting where my father had discussed potential acquisitions in the renewable energy sector. The intelligence included specific company names, valuation estimates, and timeline projections that represented exactly the type of strategic information that could be worth millions of dollars to competing investors. Theodore mentioned that Sterling Enterprises is considering a major position in offshore wind development, Marcus told Isabella during what he believed was a private moment in our home office. The target companies include Meridian Energy Solutions and Pacific Coast Wind Systems. He's planning to move within the next 6 months, before the federal subsidies create too much competition in the sector. Isabella's response demonstrated her professional expertise in extracting maximum value from the intelligence Marcus was providing. Rather than simply accepting the information, she asked follow-up questions designed to gather additional details that would make the intelligence more actionable for her clients. Did he mention specific investment amounts or whether Sterling Enterprises would be seeking controlling interests in those companies? She asked, her tone maintaining the casual intimacy of pillow talk while her questions revealed the systematic approach of a professional operative. Understanding the scale of his planned investments would help me provide better strategic advice for Hamilton Digital's positioning in the clean energy consulting market. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus providing increasingly detailed information about our family's confidential business strategies while Isabella skillfully guided the discussion to extract maximum intelligence value. Watching the recording later, I was struck by the professional precision with which she managed the emotional dynamics of their relationship to serve her intelligence-gathering objectives, but perhaps the most chilling aspect of the surveillance was discovering the extent to which Isabella had been documenting our family's personal relationships and social connections. She maintained detailed files on every person who attended our dinner parties, recording their business affiliations, family relationships, and casual comments about their own professional activities. These personality profiles were apparently used to identify additional targets for recruitment or manipulation within our social circle. During one encrypted video call with her handlers, Isabella provided a comprehensive briefing about Judge Harrison Caldwell, whose wife frequently attended charity events with me. Caldwell handles a significant number of corporate merger approvals for the regional court system, she reported with clinical precision. His wife mentioned that he's concerned about the increasing complexity of technology acquisitions and would value expert consultation about digital transformation trends. This could provide an opportunity for establishing a relationship that would give us advance intelligence about Sterling Enterprises' planned acquisitions before they become public record. The systematic nature of her operation was breathtaking in its scope and implications. Isabella wasn't just gathering intelligence about our family's business activities, she was mapping our entire social ecosystem to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited for additional intelligence gathering or market manipulation. Every friendship, every business relationship, and every casual social connection was being evaluated as a potential asset for Pacific Strategic Solutions' ongoing operations. As the evidence accumulated over several weeks of surveillance, the picture that emerged was of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been systematically targeting wealthy American families for years, stealing confidential business intelligence that was then sold to foreign competitors seeking to gain unfair advantages in strategic markets. The operation targeting our family represented just one component of a much larger campaign that could potentially affect national economic security if it continued undetected, but the most satisfying aspect of our counterintelligence operation was realizing that Isabella's confidence in her own abilities had led her to document her activities so thoroughly that she was essentially creating the evidence that would ultimately destroy her entire network. Every encrypted communication, every intelligence briefing, and every strategic assessment she provided to her handlers was being recorded and analyzed by Morrison's team, building a comprehensive case file that would expose not just her individual crimes but the complete structure of Pacific Strategic Solutions' espionage operations. The woman who had spent 18 months believing she was successfully manipulating our family was actually providing us with everything we needed to dismantle the organization that had trained and deployed her. Her professional pride in her intelligence-gathering capabilities was about to become the foundation for her complete destruction, and Pacific Strategic Solutions was about to discover that targeting the Sterling family had been the most expensive mistake in their corporate history. 3 weeks into our counterintelligence operation, the scope of evidence we'd gathered against Isabella and Pacific Strategic Solutions had reached the point where prosecuting their crimes would require coordination with federal law enforcement agencies that specialized in international corporate espionage. The complexity of the case, involving false identities, interstate commerce violations, and potential foreign intelligence services, demanded legal expertise that went far beyond what Morrison's security team could provide, no matter how sophisticated their investigative capabilities. My father's response to the comprehensive briefing I provided was immediate and characteristically strategic. Within 24 hours of learning about Isabella's true identity and the scope of her operation, Theodore Sterling had assembled a team of specialists whose combined expertise could ensure not only successful prosecution of the current threats, but also comprehensive protection against future infiltration attempts. The team he convened represented the highest levels of American counterintelligence and white-collar crime prosecution. Special Agent Isabella Chen of the FBI's Economic Espionage Unit brought 15 years of experience investigating corporate intelligence operations targeting American businesses, with particular expertise in tracing financial networks that supported foreign espionage activities. Her previous cases included successfully dismantling 3 major industrial espionage rings that had been operating on behalf of competing international conglomerates. Agent Chen's partner, Special Agent Michael Rodriguez, specialized in digital forensics and electronic surveillance, with technical capabilities that could trace encrypted communications back to their sources and identify every participant in complex criminal networks. His background included joint operations with the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security, providing access to investigative resources that could penetrate even the most sophisticated operational security measures. The legal component of our alliance was anchored by Amanda Foster, a federal prosecutor whose career had been built on pursuing complex white-collar cases involving organized criminal enterprises. Foster had successfully prosecuted more than 30 cases involving corporate espionage, money laundering, and international fraud, with a particular focus on operations that targeted American family businesses for foreign competitors. What you've uncovered represents one of the most sophisticated long-term infiltration operations we've encountered, Foster explained during our first strategy meeting at my father's private offices in downtown Rosehaven. The combination of identity construction, psychological manipulation, and systematic intelligence gathering suggests a level of professional training and financial backing that indicates state-sponsored or quasi-state-sponsored activities. The implications of her assessment were staggering. Isabella's operation wasn't just corporate espionage conducted for competitive advantage, it was potentially part of a larger campaign by foreign interests to systematically undermine American economic competitiveness by stealing the strategic intelligence that allowed successful family businesses to maintain their market advantages. Foster's preliminary analysis of the evidence we'd gathered suggested that Pacific Strategic Solutions was likely receiving financial backing and operational support from sources that went far beyond legitimate business consulting. The sophistication of their identity construction capabilities, the extensive training their operatives received, and the long-term nature of their infiltration campaigns required resources that exceeded what any private consulting firm could realistically provide. We're looking at an organization that's essentially running intelligence operations using private sector cover, Agent Chen added, reviewing the encrypted communications intercepts that Morrison's team had provided. The operational protocols. They're using mirror techniques developed by foreign intelligence services for penetrating American business communities. The federal investigation that my father's intervention had initiated would involve coordination between multiple agencies, each bringing specialized capabilities that could expose different aspects of Pacific Strategic's operations. The FBI would focus on the criminal activities being conducted within American territory, while other agencies would investigate the international connections and financial networks that supported the espionage activities, but perhaps the most crucial element of our expanded alliance was the involvement of Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a forensic psychologist who specialized in analyzing the psychological profiles and manipulation techniques used by sophisticated operatives. Dr. Warren's expertise would be essential for understanding how Isabella had been trained to exploit emotional vulnerabilities and for developing strategies to counter her manipulation techniques during the confrontation we were planning. Operatives like Dr. Li Wei are trained to maintain their cover even under extreme psychological pressure, Dr. Warren explained during our comprehensive planning session. Her academic background in behavioral psychology makes her particularly dangerous because she understands how to exploit the natural human tendency to believe people we find emotionally compelling, even when evidence suggests they're being deceptive. Dr. Warren's analysis of the surveillance recordings revealed the sophisticated psychological techniques Isabella had been using to maintain control over both Marcus and me throughout her 18-month operation. Her ability to present herself as vulnerable and trustworthy while simultaneously conducting systematic manipulation was the result of extensive training in social engineering and emotional exploitation. The key to successfully confronting an operative of her caliber is creating circumstances where her professional training works against her, Dr. Warren continued. Her confidence in her ability to manipulate social situations will compel her to attempt controlling the narrative even when doing so provides additional evidence of her criminal activities. The strategy that emerged from our collaborative planning sessions was designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously, exposing Isabella's true identity and criminal activities, gathering additional evidence about Pacific Strategic Solutions, broader operations, and ensuring that the confrontation provided maximum psychological impact while maintaining legal admissibility of all evidence collected. The centerpiece of our plan would be a carefully orchestrated dinner party that would serve as the perfect venue for revealing Isabella's true identity while ensuring that multiple witnesses were present to verify what transpired. The guest list would include key figures whose presence would guarantee that news of the revelations spread throughout Rosehaven's business community, effectively ending Isabella's ability to continue operating under her false identity. But the most crucial element of the evening would be my father's carefully timed arrival. which would transform what Isabella believed was a routine social gathering into a confrontation with someone whose resources and connections could expose not just her individual crimes but the entire network that had deployed her against our family. Theodore Sterling's presence would serve multiple strategic purposes. His reputation for comprehensive business intelligence would immediately signal to Isabella that her operation had been detected and thoroughly investigated. His connections to federal law enforcement would suggest that criminal prosecution was inevitable rather than merely possible. Most importantly, his documented history of destroying competitors who had attempted to target his family would demonstrate that the consequences of their espionage activities would extend far beyond simple legal penalties. The psychological impact of realizing she's been under surveillance by someone with my father's resources should prompt Isabella to provide information about her handlers and operational procedures, I explained to the team during our final planning session. Professional operatives are trained to maintain cover under normal interrogation circumstances, but they're also taught to cooperate when continued resistance becomes counterproductive to their long-term survival. The timing of the confrontation had been calculated to maximize our strategic advantages while minimizing Isabella's opportunities to escape or destroy evidence. The dinner party would take place on a Friday evening, when Pacific Strategic's offices would be closed and her handlers would be unavailable to provide immediate guidance or extraction support. The weekend timing would also ensure that any attempt to flee the country would be complicated by reduced commercial flight schedules and increased security screening at international airports. Agent Rodriguez had arranged for comprehensive electronic surveillance of all communication channels Isabella might use to contact her handlers, ensuring that any attempt to warn Pacific Strategic about the exposure of her operation would be intercepted and recorded as additional evidence of criminal conspiracy. Similarly, Agent Chen had coordinated with customs and immigration authorities to flag Isabella's travel documents, preventing any attempt to leave the country once her true identity was revealed. The legal framework for the operation had been carefully constructed to ensure that every aspect of the confrontation would be conducted within constitutional parameters while maximizing the admissibility of evidence in subsequent criminal proceedings. Amanda Foster had obtained sealed warrants that would allow immediate seizure of any documents or electronic devices Isabella might attempt to destroy, while also providing legal authority for comprehensive searches of her residence and known associates. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our strategic planning was realizing that Isabella's confidence in her own abilities had led her to maintain detailed records of her intelligence gathering activities that would serve as comprehensive evidence of her criminal enterprise. Her professional pride in documenting successful operations for her handlers had created an extensive paper trail that would expose not only her individual crimes but the complete structure of Pacific Strategic Solutions' espionage network. The woman who had spent 18 months believing she was successfully manipulating our family was about to discover that her target had been conducting a far more sophisticated operation against her, using resources and connections that exceeded anything she'd encountered in her previous assignments. Her most successful infiltration was about to become her complete destruction, and Pacific Strategic Solutions was about to learn that targeting the Sterling family had activated enemies they couldn't survive. The week leading up to our carefully orchestrated dinner party required a level of operational precision that rivaled military planning, with every detail coordinated between multiple agencies while maintaining absolute secrecy from both Marcus and Isabella. The challenge was particularly complex because the success of our operation depended not only on exposing Isabella's criminal activities but also on gathering enough additional evidence to dismantle the entire Pacific Strategic Solutions network. Agent Rodriguez's technical team spent 3 days installing additional surveillance equipment throughout our penthouse that would capture every word, gesture, and facial expression during the evening's confrontation. The new systems were so sophisticated that they could isolate individual conversations even during crowded social gatherings, ensuring that Isabella's responses to our revelations would be preserved in detail that could be analyzed for both immediate legal proceedings and long-term intelligence purposes. The equipment included microcameras positioned to provide multiple angles of every room where conversations might take place, directional microphones capable of capturing whispered conversations from across large spaces, and specialized recording devices that could penetrate the encryption of any communication equipment Isabella might attempt to use during the evening. Most importantly, the entire system was designed to operate autonomously, requiring no human intervention that might alert Isabella to the enhanced surveillance. Meanwhile, Dr. Warren worked with our team to develop psychological profiles of how Isabella was likely to respond under different confrontation scenarios. Her analysis suggested that Isabella's professional training would initially compel her to attempt maintaining her cover story even when presented with overwhelming evidence. of her deception, but that her academic background in psychology would eventually lead her to recognize the futility of continued resistance. Operatives with her educational background tend to shift into analytical mode when their covers are blown, Dr. Warren explained during one of our final preparation sessions. Rather than continuing to deny obvious facts, they become curious about how their operations were detected and what evidence has been gathered against them. This intellectual curiosity can be exploited to encourage voluntary disclosure of information about their handlers and operational procedures. The guest list for the dinner party had been carefully curated to include individuals whose presence would serve multiple strategic purposes while maintaining the appearance of a routine social gathering. Patricia Whitmore and her husband would provide social credibility and ensure that news of the evening's revelations spread throughout Rosehaven's elite community. Judge Harrison Caldwell's attendance would lend legal gravitas to any criminal allegations that emerged and demonstrate that law enforcement consequences were inevitable rather than merely possible. Rebecca Torres, Marcus's former business partner, before Isabella's arrival, would serve as a witness to the professional misconduct that had corrupted Hamilton Digital Solutions. Her presence would also provide context for understanding how Isabella had systematically displaced existing business relationships to gain exclusive access to Marcus and the confidential information he possessed about our family's activities. Most crucially, Sarah Chen and Amanda Foster would attend in their professional capacities as federal agents, their presence serving as an unmistakable signal that Isabella's operation had attracted the attention of law enforcement agencies with the resources and authority to pursue international criminal conspiracies. Their attendance would eliminate any possibility that Isabella might dismiss the evening's revelations as mere personal drama rather than the beginning of serious legal consequences. The menu for the evening had been designed with symbolic as well as practical considerations. I selected dishes that Isabella had specifically complimented during previous visits to our home, creating an atmosphere of familiar comfort that would encourage her to maintain her normal behavioral patterns until the moment of revelation. The wine selection included a particularly expensive vintage from my father's private collection, subtly reinforcing the wealth and sophistication of the family she had targeted, but perhaps the most delicate aspect of the preparation involved managing Marcus's expectations and behavior without revealing the true nature of what we had planned. He needed to believe that the dinner party was a routine business entertainment event, allowing him to interact naturally with Isabella while remaining completely unaware that every word they spoke was being recorded as evidence of their criminal conspiracy. To maintain this deception, I spent several days carefully coaching Marcus about the evening's supposed objectives, emphasizing the importance of impressing our guests with Hamilton Digital Solutions' technological capabilities and strategic vision. I encouraged him to prepare detailed presentations about recent client successes and future expansion plans, ensuring that he would naturally share the kind of confidential business information that would demonstrate Isabella's systematic exploitation of his trust. The challenge of maintaining normal intimacy with Marcus while knowing about his affair and Isabella's true identity required emotional discipline that tested every aspect of my training in strategic thinking and operational security. During our private conversations about the dinner party preparations, I had to respond naturally to his suggestions about seating arrangements and conversation topics while ensuring that every element of the evening would serve our investigative objectives. Marcus's enthusiasm for the event was both touching and infuriating, as he genuinely believed that the dinner party would represent a significant milestone in his business development and social integration within Rosehaven's elite community. His excitement about introducing Isabella to potential new clients and demonstrating their professional partnership revealed how completely he had been manipulated into serving her intelligence-gathering objectives. This could be exactly the kind of exposure that takes Hamilton Digital Solutions to the next level, he told me enthusiastically while reviewing the guest list. Having Judge Caldwell and the Whitmores meet Isabella in a social setting will demonstrate that we have the kind of sophisticated consulting capabilities that appeal to the community's most successful families. His complete obliviousness to the criminal conspiracy he had been facilitating was simultaneously heartbreaking and enraging. The man I had married and trusted with the most intimate details of my family's business empire had been systematically betraying those confidences for months, apparently believing that his emotional connection with Isabella somehow justified his violations of both personal and professional ethics. The final element of our preparation involved coordinating my father's arrival with split-second precision to maximize its psychological impact on Isabella. Theodore Sterling's entrance needed to occur at exactly the moment when she was most confident in her ability to control the evening's social dynamics, transforming her sense of security into recognition that she was facing an opponent whose resources exceeded anything she had previously encountered. Agent Chen had arranged for comprehensive surveillance of all routes leading to our penthouse, ensuring that my father's approach would be monitored and that the timing of his entrance could be adjusted based on real-time assessment of the dinner party's progression. The goal was to have him arrive just as Isabella was beginning to feel comfortable with the evening's guest dynamics, when her guard would be lowest and her shock at his appearance would be most profound. Morrison's security team had prepared detailed briefing materials for my father that included comprehensive analysis of Isabella's psychological profile, her known operational procedures, and the specific information she had gathered about our family's business activities. This preparation would allow him to conduct his confrontation with surgical precision, asking questions that would reveal the scope of her espionage activities while demonstrating his knowledge of her true identity and criminal background. The evening's logistics had been planned with the same attention to detail that my father brought to major business negotiations, with contingency plans for every possible scenario and backup systems that would ensure the success of our operation regardless of how Isabella might attempt to respond to the exposure of her criminal activities. As Friday evening approached, every element of our trap was perfectly positioned. Isabella would arrive believing she was attending a routine social gathering where she could continue gathering intelligence about our family's business activities while maintaining her romantic manipulation of Marcus. Instead, she was walking into a carefully orchestrated confrontation that would expose not only her individual crimes but the entire network of corporate espionage that had deployed her against American families. The woman who had spent 18 months believing she was successfully manipulating the Sterling family was about to discover that she had been under surveillance by opponents whose resources and connections exceeded anything in her professional experience. Her most sophisticated operation was about to become her complete destruction, and Pacific Strategic Solutions was about to learn that some families fight back with resources that could dismantle entire criminal enterprises. The revelation that Agent Chen was law enforcement rather than a business consultant sent another shock wave through Isabella's composure. Her professional assessment of the situation was clearly evolving from damage control to recognition that she was facing criminal prosecution rather than mere social embarrassment. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Isabella attempted, but her voice lacked the confidence that had characterized her previous 18 months of deception. The woman who had successfully manipulated our family while conducting sophisticated espionage was beginning to realize that she had walked into a trap that would expose not just her individual crimes but the entire network that had deployed her against us. My father's response was delivered with the quiet authority that had made him one of the most feared business negotiators on the East Coast. "Dr. Li Wei, there's no misunderstanding. We know exactly who you are, who you work for, and what you've been doing in our family's home for the past 18 months. The only question remaining is whether you'll cooperate with federal authorities or force them to pursue more aggressive investigative methods." The words, "federal authorities," completed Isabella's psychological breakdown, as she realized that her exposure involved law enforcement agencies with the resources and authority to pursue international criminal conspiracies. The confident operative who had spent months believing she was successfully manipulating the Sterling family was finally understanding that she had become the target of a counterintelligence operation that exceeded anything in her professional experience. The aftermath of Isabella's exposure unfolded with the swift precision that characterized every aspect of Theodore Sterling's business operations. Within minutes of her psychological breakdown, Agent Chen had formally identified herself and Prosecutor Foster as federal law enforcement officials, transforming our dinner party into an official investigation site where every word would carry legal consequences. Isabella's professional training had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for the comprehensive nature of the evidence that Agent Rodriguez began presenting through the sophisticated display system we'd installed for the evening. High-definition recordings of her encrypted communications with Pacific Strategic Solutions handlers played for all witnesses to observe, her own voice providing irrefutable documentation of the systematic espionage she'd conducted against our family. "I need intelligence on Theodore Sterling's renewable energy investments." Her recorded voice filled the dining room with clinical precision. "The target timeline is accelerated. My asset has provided preliminary information about Meridian Energy Solutions and Pacific Coast Wind Systems, but I need comprehensive financial projections and acquisition strategies before his next board meeting." The recording continued for several minutes, revealing not only the scope of information she'd stolen but the sophisticated network of handlers who'd been coordinating her intelligence-gathering activities. Each communication demonstrated the professional nature of her operation while providing evidence that could be used to identify and prosecute her entire support network. Marcus's reaction to hearing his intimate conversations weaponized for espionage purposes was devastating to witness. The man who'd believed his emotional connection with Isabella represented genuine love was confronting the reality that every private moment had been carefully orchestrated to extract maximum intelligence. value from his access to sterling family secrets. You recorded our conversations, he said, his voice carrying the kind of betrayal that comes from recognizing complete manipulation. Everything we shared, every confidence I trusted you with, was just part of your job. Isabella's response revealed the cold calculation that had guided her actions throughout their 18-month relationship. Marcus, you have to understand that my feelings for you are genuine, she attempted, but her words lacked conviction even as she spoke them. The professional requirements of my assignment don't negate the personal connection we developed. Judge Caldwell's judicial experience had encountered many sophisticated criminals, but the scope of Isabella's operation impressed even his seasoned perspective. Dr. Li Wei, he said with the authority that had guided decades of criminal proceedings, the evidence being presented suggests systematic violations of federal espionage statutes, interstate commerce regulations, and international trade security laws. You're facing potential sentences that could exceed 20 years in federal prison. The legal consequences that Amanda Foster outlined were comprehensive in their scope and devastating in their implications. The charges would include identity fraud, corporate espionage, violation of international trade secrets, conspiracy to commit economic espionage, and potentially violations of foreign intelligence surveillance statutes if her connections to Pacific Strategic Solutions revealed state-sponsored backing. More importantly, Foster continued, her prosecutorial experience evident in her systematic approach to building the case, your cooperation in exposing Pacific Strategic Solutions' complete network could significantly influence sentencing recommendations. Federal judges tend to view favorably defendants who provide substantial assistance in dismantling criminal enterprises that threaten American economic security. Isabella's professional assessment of her situation was clearly evolving from denial to calculation as she recognized that cooperation might represent her only opportunity to avoid complete destruction. Her psychological training allowed her to understand that continued resistance would be counterproductive, while her survival instinct suggested that providing information about her handlers could offer some protection from the legal consequences she was facing. What kind of cooperation are you seeking? She asked with the clinical detachment of someone who was transitioning from operative to potential informant. Her question revealed both her acceptance of defeat and her continued focus on minimizing personal damage through strategic negotiation. Agent Chen's response outlined the comprehensive intelligence operation that would be required to dismantle Pacific Strategic Solutions and identify all American families who had been targeted by similar infiltration campaigns. We need complete identification of your handlers, detailed information about other operatives currently active in the United States, comprehensive lists of families and businesses that have been targeted, and full documentation of intelligence that's been gathered and transmitted to foreign competitors. The scope of information Isabella possessed was staggering in its implications for American economic security. Over her 5-year career with Pacific Strategic Solutions, she had participated in operations targeting more than 30 wealthy families throughout North America, stealing confidential business intelligence that had been used to manipulate markets and destroy competitive advantages that American businesses had spent generations developing. The Pemberton family in Boston was just one of many operations, she admitted, her professional pride compelling her to reveal the scope of her network's activities. Pacific Strategic maintains active operatives in every major American business center, with particular focus on families whose wealth derives from real estate, technology, and energy sectors that competing international interests want to penetrate. My father's response to learning about the broader threat demonstrated why the Sterling family had survived and thrived for 3 generations despite sophisticated attempts at infiltration and manipulation. Dr. Li Wei, he said with the kind of quiet authority that had built a $2 billion empire, your organization made a fundamental error when they decided to target my family. We don't just defend ourselves, we destroy threats completely, to ensure they never threaten anyone else. The investigation that would follow Isabella's arrest expanded rapidly as federal agencies began coordinating with international law enforcement to trace Pacific Strategic Solutions' financial networks and operational connections. Agent Rodriguez's digital forensics team had already identified encrypted servers containing comprehensive records of espionage activities spanning multiple countries and targeting hundreds of prominent families and businesses. Within 6 months, the criminal conspiracy Isabella had helped orchestrate was completely dismantled. Pacific Strategic Solutions was revealed to be a front organization for a network of corporate espionage operations that had been systematically stealing American business intelligence for competing international conglomerates. More than 40 operatives were arrested across North America, and the financial networks supporting their activities were frozen by coordinated law enforcement actions. Isabella herself received a reduced sentence of 8 years in federal prison. in exchange for her comprehensive cooperation in exposing the espionage network. Her testimony provided crucial evidence that led to the successful prosecution of her handlers and the identification of foreign intelligence services that had been supporting Pacific Strategic's operations. The revelation that Agent Chen was law enforcement rather than a business consultant sent another shock wave through Isabella's composure. Her professional assessment of the situation was clearly evolving from damage control to recognition that she was facing criminal prosecution rather than mere social embarrassment. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Isabella attempted, but her voice lacked the confidence that had characterized her previous 18 months of deception. The woman who had successfully manipulated our family while conducting sophisticated espionage was beginning to realize that she had walked into a trap that would expose not just her individual crimes but the entire network that had deployed her against us.my father's response was delivered with the quiet authority that had made him one of the most feared business negotiators on the East Coast. "Dr. Li Wei, there's no misunderstanding. We know exactly who you are, who you work for, and what you've been doing in our family's home for the past 18 months. The only question remaining is whether you'll cooperate with federal authorities or force them to pursue more aggressive investigative methods." The words, "federal authorities," completed Isabella's psychological breakdown, as she realized that her exposure involved law enforcement agencies with the resources and authority to pursue international criminal conspiracies. The confident operative who had spent months believing she was successfully manipulating the Sterling family was finally understanding that she had become the target of a counterintelligence operation that exceeded anything in her professional experience. The aftermath of Isabella's exposure unfolded with the swift precision that characterized every aspect of Theodore Sterling's business operations. Within minutes of her psychological breakdown, Agent Chen had formally identified herself and Prosecutor Foster as federal law enforcement officials, transforming our dinner party into an official investigation site where every word would carry legal consequences. Isabella's professional training had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for the comprehensive nature of the evidence that Agent Rodriguez began presenting through the sophisticated display system we'd installed for the evening. High-definition recordings of her encrypted communications with Pacific Strategic Solutions handlers played for all witnesses to observe, her own voice providing irrefutable documentation of the systematic espionage she'd conducted against our family. "I need intelligence on Theodore Sterling's renewable energy investments." Her recorded voice filled the dining room with clinical precision. "The target timeline is accelerated. My asset has provided preliminary information about Meridian Energy Solutions and Pacific Coast Wind Systems, but I need comprehensive financial projections and acquisition strategies before his next board meeting." The recording continued for several minutes, revealing not only the scope of information she'd stolen but the sophisticated network of handlers who'd been coordinating her intelligence-gathering activities. Each communication demonstrated the professional nature of her operation while providing evidence that could be used to identify and prosecute her entire support network. Marcus's reaction to hearing his intimate conversations weaponized for espionage purposes was devastating to witness. The man who'd believed his emotional connection with Isabella represented genuine love was confronting the reality that every private moment had been carefully orchestrated to extract maximum intelligence value from his access to Sterling family secrets. "You recorded our conversations," he said, his voice carrying the kind of betrayal that comes from recognizing complete manipulation. "Everything we shared, every confidence I trusted you with, was just part of your job." Isabella's response revealed the cold calculation that had guided her actions throughout their 18-month relationship. "Marcus, you have to understand that my feelings for you are genuine," she attempted, but her words lacked conviction even as she spoke them. "The professional requirements of my assignment don't negate the personal connection we developed." Judge Caldwell's judicial experience had encountered many sophisticated criminals, but the scope of Isabella's operation impressed even his seasoned perspective. "Dr. Li Wei," he said with the authority that had guided decades of criminal proceedings, "the evidence being presented suggests systematic violations of federal espionage statutes, interstate commerce regulations, and international trade security laws. You're facing potential sentences that could exceed 20 years in federal prison." The legal consequences that Amanda Foster outlined were comprehensive in their scope and devastating in their implications. The charges would include identity fraud, corporate espionage, violation of international trade secrets, conspiracy to commit economic espionage, and potentially violations of foreign intelligence surveillance statutes if her connections to Pacific Strategic Solutions revealed state-sponsored backing. More importantly, Foster continued, her prosecutorial experience evident in her systematic approach to building the case, your cooperation in exposing Pacific Strategic Solutions complete network could significantly influence sentencing recommendations. Federal judges tend to view favorably defendants who provide substantial assistance in dismantling criminal enterprises that threaten American economic security. Isabella's professional assessment of her situation was clearly evolving from denial to calculation as she recognized that cooperation might represent her only opportunity to avoid complete destruction. Her psychological training allowed her to understand that continued resistance would be counterproductive, while her survival instinct suggested that providing information about her handlers could offer some protection from the legal consequences she was facing. "What kind of cooperation are you seeking?" she asked with the clinical detachment of someone who was transitioning from operative to potential informant. Her question revealed both her acceptance of defeat and her continued focus on minimizing personal damage through strategic negotiation. Agent Chen's response outlined the comprehensive intelligence operation that would be required to dismantle Pacific Strategic Solutions and identify all American families who had been targeted by similar infiltration campaigns. "We need complete identification of your handlers, detailed information about other operatives currently active in the United States, comprehensive lists of families and businesses that have been targeted, and full documentation of intelligence that's been gathered and transmitted to foreign competitors." The scope of information Isabella possessed was staggering in its implications for American economic security. Over her 5-year career with Pacific Strategic Solutions, she had participated in operations targeting more than 30 wealthy families throughout North America, stealing confidential business intelligence that had been used to manipulate markets and destroy competitive advantages that American businesses had spent generations developing. The Pemberton family in Boston was just one of many operations, she admitted, her professional pride compelling her to reveal the scope of her network's activities. Pacific Strategic maintains active operatives in every major American business center, with particular focus on families whose wealth derives from real estate, technology, and energy sectors that competing international interests want to penetrate. My father's response to learning about the broader threat demonstrated why the Sterling family had survived and thrived for 3 generations despite sophisticated attempts at infiltration and manipulation. "Dr. Li Wei," he said with the kind of quiet authority that had built a $2 billion empire, "your organization made a fundamental error when they decided to target my family. We don't just defend ourselves, we destroy threats completely to ensure they never threaten anyone else." The investigation that would follow Isabella's arrest expanded rapidly as federal agencies began coordinating with international law enforcement to trace Pacific Strategic Solutions' financial networks and operational connections. Agent Rodriguez's digital forensics team had already identified encrypted servers containing comprehensive records of espionage activities spanning multiple countries and targeting hundreds of prominent families and businesses. Within 6 months, the criminal conspiracy Isabella had helped orchestrate was completely dismantled. Pacific Strategic Solutions was revealed to be a front organization for a network of corporate espionage operations that had been systematically stealing American business intelligence for competing international conglomerates. More than 40 operatives were arrested across North America, and the financial networks supporting their activities were frozen by coordinated law enforcement actions. Isabella herself received a reduced sentence of 8 years in federal prison in exchange for her comprehensive cooperation in exposing the espionage network. Her testimony provided crucial evidence that led to the successful prosecution of her handlers and the identification of foreign intelligence services that had been supporting Pacific Strategic's operations. Isabella Chen's mistake was believing that successful manipulation requires only understanding your target's vulnerabilities, he explained during one of our post-operation discussions. She never considered that her targets might possess resources and connections that exceeded her own capabilities. That blindness to superior opposition is what ultimately destroyed her entire network. The woman who had spent 18 months believing she was successfully infiltrating and manipulating the Sterling family had actually walked into a comprehensive counterintelligence operation that exposed an international criminal conspiracy targeting American economic interests. Her confidence in her own abilities had led her to document her crimes so thoroughly that she'd essentially prosecuted herself while providing evidence that dismantled an entire espionage network. Today, as I continue building Sterling Contemporary Gallery into one of the nation's premier art institutions, I understand that the experience of surviving sophisticated betrayal and corporate espionage has made me stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined possible. The skills my father taught me about strategic thinking and protecting family interests had been tested under the most extreme circumstances and proven effective against threats that could have destroyed everything 3 generations of Sterlings had built. Isabella Chen's operation had been designed to steal our family's secrets and destroy our competitive advantages. Instead, it became the foundation for developing security capabilities that now protect dozens of American families from similar threats. Sometimes the most dangerous attacks become opportunities to build defenses that ensure such threats never succeed again, and sometimes the people who believe they're hunting you discover too late that they've become the prey in someone else's carefully planned operation. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.